Hey everybody, so I'm going to run you guys through these things while I have some quick individual meets with you guys to talk about grades and such. So get these down. We are looking at taking the test on Wednesday this week. This just gives me an opportunity to meet with each one of you guys that I might not otherwise have, talk about grades, talk about where you're at with like a month left. So do your best to get these down, get some ideas. This last piece is going to be all about the French Revolution, and the French Revolution kind of comes in four stages. There's a moderate phase, it lasts from 1789 to 1792, which is like the beginning, where they overthrow the monarchy, they create a national assembly, they draft a new constitution, and that's where that tennis court oath thing that we talked about the other day happened, and that Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen happened. Then we enter into the radical phase in 1792. And during that, the republic is declared, which means they move away from a monarchy completely into a republic, which is a representative elected based type of government, similar to obviously what we have, to the republic for which it stands, that kind of thing. And so a republic is declared, moving towards a more democratic style of government. They execute the king. King Louis XVI is executed. And they form this thing called the Committee of Public Safety, which job is to make sure that this revolution goes the way it should. Any political opponents that don't do what they're supposed to do basically are, silenced. There's some war with European powers during this time because some of the European powers, especially the British and some of the surrounding countries, see them as weak. And there's a rise of a group of people called the Jacobins. Now, the Jacobins are almost kind of like a political party that come out of the Jacobin Club. And they're a political organization that basically played a big role in this during the Revolution because they help overthrow the king and establish a republic. They're also known for their part in what comes next, which is the Reign of Terror. But you have this first phase where things start to move away from, being the one style of government into another, but it isn't without its bumps and problems. Similar to the United States, where we had the difficulty where our government didn't work the way we wanted it to under the Articles of Confederation. Theirs is more in, like, the transition is extremely messy in that it's like a what is next and who's in power and who's in control. So then we move into this time period known as the Reign of Terror. And the Reign of Terror is marked by increased violence in the revolution and the execution of literally thousands of people by the guillotine. You obviously see a number. I rounded the number. I found that in like two different sources. I found varying numbers, so maybe 40,000 isn't the perfect number. And it's led by a guy named Maximilien Robespierre. I like that name, Robespierre. And his primary goals as a revolutionary leader were to establish a republic based on popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is the idea that a country kind of has its own say based on the will of the people. And he also thought that he and those in control needed to defend France from internal and external threats. He thought that everyone needed to be a good citizen, and that's how a successful revolution would happen. And he basically advocated for really swift, really rigid, justice for people, and thus the executions. They had this revolutionary tribunal, which kind of acted as the judge, jury, and executioner for things. Now, obviously, there's a reaction to all of this. People don't want this violence in the streets. That's a huge number of people to be executed. Becoming a political criminal was, basically a death sentence. And so people start to rebel against Robespierre and the Jacobins, and in particular, power seized by a group of people called the Thermidorians. And the Thermidorians, when they seize power, it's more of a move towards a more moderate government that's still, unfortunately, really unstable. And people who supported or participated in this overthrow, they were moderates, but they'd often seen as not being aligned with some of the original goals. But this Thermidorian reaction marks a turning point in the revolution, where they move away from the Reign of Terror's radical policies and towards more moderate, liberal stances. Now, some of those liberal things that they wanted to do was they wanted to decentralize the power. They wanted to spread more power out to the people and to representatives instead of having all the power in someone like Robespierre's hands, which, by the way, he was executed. They want to try to restore order politically and legally, and they want to abandon some of the more extreme versions or interpretations of the law. All right, and so things start to move in, I guess, a more democratic and political way. And then along comes Napoleon. Now, Napoleon kind of rises to power in 1799, and his power is taken in 1815. And Napoleon starts off as a general. He was seen as one of the great artillery / cannon leaders of the time, understood line and formation warfare very well, and had been extremely successful in war leading to this point. If you take American military history, we talk a little bit about Napoleon because he's kind of an example for a number of different kinds of early fighting styles that are used throughout things like the Revolution, and even though he kind of happens after the Revolution, he uses some of these things and perfects them. Some of the things in the War of 1812 and even into the Civil War. Now, he seizes power through something called a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat is where someone uses, basically, it can be military, it can be the power of the people to overthrow the current government. And in 1799, he establishes a consulate, which marks the end of the Revolution and the beginning of what's known as the Napoleonic era. Now, the Napoleonic era is obviously this time up until 1815, where Napoleon is in charge and kind of is... Well, in 1804, he crowns himself emperor for life. So we go away from the more democratic federal system to this, I guess you would say, military code system. Napoleon very famously establishes the Napoleonic Code, which is also known as the French Civil Code. And it was a legal code that started in 1804, and it established a system of civil law. Where basically everything is nationalized. It replaces like regional law that existed during the French Revolution. It also emphasized equality before the law, so everybody was going to be treated equal regardless of social status, freedom of religion, and kind of the idea that you have private property and what happens on that property is up to you as long as it's not harming anybody else. So it fits into that Enlightenment idea of life, liberty, and property, and the whole like code that we have towards each other. It had a really big impact on French law and influenced legal systems around the world. But it also reflected this problem of the time, and it's very what's called patriarchal. Patriarchal means it's male-dominated. Men had greater power and authority in family issues and political issues, and it also limited women's legal rights. Along with that, he also developed a continental system, which was basically a system of embargoes, which are like trade restrictions set to cripple the British. This happened in 1806. Obviously, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the French and British, classically throughout history, even though they fight on the same side in World War I and World War II, they don't always get along very well. And especially at this time in history, they're a huge rivalry. And so the system, the continental system, aims to kind of cripple the British economy by making trade difficult for them. Countries that were allied with or controlled by France were not allowed to trade with the British, and basically hoping to cause a collapse in the British economy, which would cause a collapse in their government style. And then obviously France's idea was to move in and take that over. Eventually, through war and through just kind of their system, Napoleon and France start to dominate European territory. They start to dominate European economy and political affairs. Napoleon is maybe the most powerful person on the planet at this time, aside from maybe the various presidents in the United States. Now, this obviously all falls apart. In 1814 and 1815, there's a thing called the Congress of Vienna, and at the Congress of Vienna, they discuss more of a balance of power. Conservative leadership is restored. Napoleon is overthrown and sent to Elba to be in exile. And, there's a whole thing about that we can talk about another day. And this leads to a little bit of a lasting peace in Europe, the idea that the European countries can kind of coexist. But at the same time, you get these ideas that are called nationalism. Nationalism is kind of like in a good version, it's a pride or a love for your country. In the dangerous version, nationalism is where that pride becomes so extreme that you feel like you have to force your country's agenda on other countries, I guess would be the best way to say it. Yeah, there's a lot about nationalism in the news right now. You can make decisions about that. So listen, that's kind of it. I probably went pretty quick on this. I'm sorry, but it's May. I want to get through a bunch of history. Now remember that test that I'm going to give you guys on Wednesday. We're going to have a matching section with the people from early in the chapter, your Voltaires, your Locke's, your Hobbes, your Rousseau's, your Adam Smiths. There's going to be some multiple choice questions about the American Revolution, a little bit about the French Revolution, and then there's going to be at least one short essay. I think I wrote two, but I might only put one on the test. And that short essay is really going to kind of be about it's going to have something to do with the American Revolution and the Enlightenment thinkers. So I feel like that's a pretty good hint. Get these things down in your notebook. Again, when I call you up, I'm going to run through grades with you. Nothing but honesty. Please feel free to ask questions. So if you have questions about this, let me know. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.